Coming up with draft night upon us for the NBA, could the Brooklyn Nets be exploring trading in, maybe moving a player like Dorian Sharpe as the buzz starts to build? Anything involving Mikal Bridges or even pursuing a star. It's all on the table, and we're going to set it for you coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marbeck. We thank you, Voice, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Yes, all of the great playoffs are over, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all along. FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. And Doug, come on, buddy. Let's bring the juice. Let's talk about Brooklyn, mixing it up, stirring the pot. Dormant summer, it's all going to start to cook on draft night.
Oh, baby, we're here. We're less than 24 hours away from the draft. As of right now, at 8 p.m. here on Tuesday evening, Nets do not have a draft pick. We will see how it goes. It's happening at Barclays. I had posited that sort of like the Olympics or the World Cup, that when you hold the draft in the team's building, the host team should just automatically get a first round pick. And, I look, and if it just happens to be at Barclays every year, which it is, then it benefits the Nets. Look, I mean, you go move it somewhere else if you want it to benefit somewhere else. So until they put that rule into place, which is not going to happen this year, we're in a place where, at least right now, the Nets do not have a pick. But we're going to talk about some scenarios where that ends up being possibly not the case as the day and the evening kind of rolls forward.
I think, as we talked about some of the different things that came up here, we went at a high level, the big blow-up scenarios, the Mikal Bridges of it all, Cameron Johnson, even Dorian Finney-Smith. We've been discussing that at length, but as we've been building towards the draft, there's now another angle. Michael Scotto covering a lot of this around the Memphis Grizzlies and Dorian Sharpe, someone that in the offseason you and I have talked about, just like with Cam Thomas. Well, extension eligible. What are the intentions here? How do you look down to the season in a meaningless year? He couldn't seem to find big minutes. I find it fascinating about thinking about getting into this draft and Dorian Sharpe actually being the vehicle gets Brooklyn there. Not something I would have anticipated, say, a month or two ago.
Yeah, the Dorian Sharpe thing is interesting. I think that's probably where we start. If there's an actually realistic, world where the Nets are able to trade into this draft, it might be via Sharpe. It's an odd place to go because for a couple different reasons. Now, look, it's been reported, and Scotto's great, and I trusted like this is what's being thrown out there. It's a little weird because it probably means either A, you're drafting a center, or B, you're like 100% confident that you're re-signing Nick Claxton, because if that didn't, if you traded Sharpe and you didn't sign Claxton, then you're really stuck with that, with no center at all. So I get it from like maybe a change of scenery is necessary for a guy like Dorian. His name has been floated out in other places as other teams might value him a little higher than the Nets do. So I guess if there's a way to get in the second round, although it's kind of, I will say the one weird thing about that is unless you're going for a completely different archetype of player, I do find it a little hard to imagine the Nets get someone so much better than Dorian Sharpe in wherever they would draft him right now. A guy, he's rebounded really well. He has his limitations, but we've seen sort of year-over-year improvement. And we also saw him just get end of the bench at the end of last season. So it's like hard to know exactly where they land on him, but it is interesting to think about that Dorian could be out the door. My guess is it doesn't happen, but that's just a guess more than anything. Dorian plus DFS, does that really sweeten the pot and get like them all the way up to 9 on the Memphis board? I also don't see that happening really. So it's a little bit of a sticky situation. I think I think it's probably been talked about, and I'd be kind of shocked if it got all the way there.
What's interesting about it is that, because you mentioned maybe sweetening with 2 players, okay, but you got to remember then talking about matching salaries, and some teams are going to be a little more restricted. Who do the Nets want to take back? Then, but with Dorian, it's a low cost. It doesn't take a lot to bring him in. And if you think about the draft, you bring up a good point. Going to get rid of a high energy rebounder to go draft a high energy rebounder, Tyler Smith maybe, who's been talked about kind of in that 20s range potentially, depending on who they're dealing with. Obviously, Memphis at 9. But the other side of it would be going the other way. So, and by the way, peek behind the curtain, I did some mock drafts internally, and I maybe walked down the path where I jettisoned Dorian Sharpe and was unable to replace him in the draft. So there are these weird scenarios. You mentioned re-signing Claxton. That's a big factor. Maybe a guy like Filipowski would make sense because he's not the same archetype. This floor stretching big, not as athletic, can shoot from the perimeter a little bit, can handle and pass kind of inside the arc and help facilitate the offense. So I think you're right in saying, hey, this would probably represent some level of shift here, because even in re-signing Nick Claxton, you'd still look at this roster if no Dorian Sharpe and you don't bring in any other type of 5. This team is thin. It's not with Trendon Watford, small ball 5, Dorian Finney-Smith sticking around for another year. You'd be opening up a different type of issue. I guess that's all relative to how competitive you think you're going to be in the short term.
For sure. And this is what makes this situation a little confusing. I do believe that the Nets have probably tried. I think it's for sure they've tried to get into this draft, right? I think that my guess is they've tried to get into the draft and the asking price has been too high, right? Like maybe a Dorian Finney-Smith and they can't, it's a little hard to match salary. And look, we had this problem when trying to trade DFS. I even when we were doing some mock stuff and just kind of seeing what could happen, it's great to say you want to trade him. The salary becomes a little bit of a problem because not a lot of teams can generate these TPEs if you don't have the cap space necessary to do it on the front end. And a lot of teams that would sort of want him in the mix are already over the salary cap. So it's like they have to send money back out. And then you just get into this weird spot. So when you actually try to make these DFS, Dorian Finney-Smith trades, it's not really so easy for the teams that might target him. Memphis is one of these teams that because they have guys like LaRavia, they have guys like Kennard, they have guys that you can kind of match salaries a little bit with, which is why it, on its face, makes sense. Where it falls down is like, is it good enough for the 9th pick? So none of this is super clean. So I think probably what's happened is the Nets have tried to get into this draft. I think they recognize they would like to have a draft pick, and the clean swap value isn't really working for what they have the ability to throw out there, right? And so it's like, oh, we're going to take money back and get a second rounder for DFS? Because I bet you that's like something that's been floated, right? It's like, oh, we'll match the money and you get a second round pick. And they're like, well, we're kind of thinking first, and that's kind of where it falls apart. Again, that's me speculating, but it mostly comes from us just trying to put together a bunch of sort of clean fit trade packages, and you just get down the line. You're like, they just don't really exist. Like, there's not that many of them. Kings, maybe, kind of. Memphis, kind of. But then you just kind of get stuck. So I think that's my guess is probably what's happened here for the Nets.
And a little blood in the water, right? If teams get the sense that you're trying to get rid of this player, especially in the case of Dorian Finney-Smith, you held on too long. Yeah, we'll take him for you. But come on, what do you really expect for it? And in what's considered to be a weak draft class, hard for Brooklyn to sit here and say, even maybe a second round. Well, second rounder in 2024 is not built like a second rounder in 2025. Coming up here in a second, though, there's also been some pre-draft workouts held by Brooklyn, which could maybe gleam an alternate avenue here to get in some additional young, developable talent. We'll talk about that and whether or not we think anything bigger could be on the horizon coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at eBay. Passion, drive, and patience. That's a formula for winning championship. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle. You level it up to peak performance, superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more. Maybe you're into speed. Maybe it's power. Maybe it's style. eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, with all the parts you need at the prices you want. Easy to make your car the MVP. Bring home those huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive. At ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right, so as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, setting the table for the draft, something that currently the Brooklyn Nets are not a part of, but we hope that they will get in the mix for. One other thing that I started to notice, and I do want to talk about these pre-draft workouts, I also think when you look through the list, when you go over on Tankathon, wherever you want to go ahead and get it, doesn't matter where these guys are ranked. What does matter is age. So I walk through scenarios where a guy like Carson Carrington falls a little bit in the draft. Now you look at some of his numbers and you say, is that shot going to be good or bad going to the NBA? Was he asked to do more than you would want him to do at the college level translating? Well, he's under 19 years old, right? You look at guys with the ages, I think, that fit the right spot for Brooklyn, not unlike Noah Clowney a year ago. Hey, if I can get into the later first round, even if it's the second round, but I believe there's a value based on the fact that we're not going to be competitive over the next season or two, potentially. I can maybe calculate that risk for myself of guy developing in the background. That's a worthwhile prospect for us. I wonder how the Brooklyn Nets look at that, especially when you see some guys in this draft considered to be more NBA ready. But if you're talking 23 or 22, close to 23 years old, Brooklyn should be wary of that, because their impact won't be calculated until they're 25 and they're already into, bridging the prime of their careers. And I think that that's probably an equation here the Nets are doing. Dorian Finney-Smith, hey, you want to give me multiple second rounders? If a team has them, the Pacers have a lot of those. Hey, we'll fire 3 shots on guys that are 20 and a half or younger and hope that 1 or maybe 2 of them pans out over this few seasons.
Yeah, and this is the other part of we're of the mind that every body they can bring in here is probably worth it, because they just need to try to hit on as many sort of dart throws as they can get. Like, they're just not in a place where they can be super picky around talent. They just don't have enough, and they definitely don't have enough on sort of the younger part of the bell curve when it comes to NBA players. It's just the facts. Like, a lot of their NBA ready guys are getting a little older, except for Cam Thomas. And we've probably seen enough of Clowney. I know everyone wants to throw in Tariq Whitehead. I mean, we just don't have any idea. The guy's not really played healthy in multiple seasons now. And so you can't set your watch to it, I don't think. But when you look at where the Nets, because the Nets have, you mentioned before the break, the Nets have worked out players here. The Nets have worked out, roughly 15 players that we know of that's been reported. And this comes reposted by Eric Slater, but originally comes from Hoops Hype, who keeps really, really great track of this. I'm not going to read the list of the players that they did work out, but because you can just go check it out on Hoops Hype or Slater or wherever else. I will say though, the players that they have shown to work out are mocked in mostly the second round or not really mocked at all. Right. And this is, so that would point to you thinking maybe they're just thinking they're going to end up in the second round here. Right. And unless they've had secret workouts, which can happen, that's for sure. They can keep this stuff really low key. So I don't think this list it might not be exhaustive and comprehensive, but if you look at the list, it's guys that we would not have done a lot of draft analysis on, even if the Nets were drafting in the bottom of the first round. Right. Yep. And so if you want to kind of place the puzzle pieces together to see if you get a whole picture of what the front office is thinking, things are lining up. If it happens at all, we're probably looking second round. And with the second round, it's we'll see. Sometimes it's Gigi Jackson, and a lot of times it's guys who never don't see that much in the NBA court. Jalen Wilson flashed enough, and he's got a guaranteed contract, so I should have started with him. But you know what I mean. So in general, I think we're getting a kind of a view of probably of how their mind is working around this problem right now.
In care of Hoops Hype, if you go over and look at it in terms of those pre-drafts, only 4 players out of that lengthy list. They said not going to go down the whole entire run here, but only 4 players are listed within top 60 within the 2-round draft that will be kicking off on Wednesday, right? So 32, 49, 56, and 57. Then you have a hundreds of players that are not ranked in terms of potentially going in one of those first 2 rounds. So the one side of it is, yes, being in the second round, certainly you can get a little bit excited. I'll mention the one player here in a second who I did go through some internal mocks and ended up making a little bit of a margin move with Boston to get this young player out. But when you think about, so my mind kind of goes to a little bit of the other version is can't make these trades, can't make the decisions, can't get the moves we want to get done here. Okay, maybe we get future assets for Dorian Finney-Smith, whatever it may look like, or Sharpe. But also going to come the part when the draft ends, and then you get to sign some of these bodies. So this is even beyond whether or not getting into this draft class is going to be feasible for Brooklyn. I think it's also about our G League roster. Summer League's coming up next month. We may throw out a lot of invitations because, again, if you go and look at that roster and some guys that got call-ups last year at the back end of the season, they weren't blowing your socks off. They weren't players that we think are going to make a big leap to the NBA roster this upcoming season. So it is as much about turning over the roster as well. Now, should that excite the Nets fan base? Maybe, maybe not. But the reality is, I think the Nets, by all indications, are telling you it's far more likely that it's maybe second round and maybe invites before it's getting into the first round and getting one of these higher prospects.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, so, we started this by saying, like, sort of what's the expectation here for draft night. I think the expectations probably at this point, like I said, have to be pretty low. I think that, we've kind of hoped and wished on getting it. We've run the gamut here, right? We've been doing this. The Nets off season's been long. So, and the Nets off season,
super fun from a content standpoint, I think.
Nets off season, arguably started, well in advance of when the actual season ended too. So we've run the gamut on, all the way from like trading bridges for that Rockets number 3 pick, all the way down to like, what's available for DFS and Dorian Sharpe, and like, would they move any of these other guys? So can Cam Johnson go out there? What happens if they don't re-sign Claxton? I think now that we're in the home stretch here, I think we held out hope. I mean, just from an excitement standpoint, look, it's fun when your team drafts a guy. Like start there, right? It's just fun when your team drafts a guy. You don't know, you want to look at the tape, you try to imagine how they're going to fit. I mean, it's just fun. Like it's kind of a bummer when the team, no matter where they are, is when they're out in the draft, because the draft's a huge event and you want your team to be part of it. You want to see your guys get called up. It's just fun to dream on the situation. Now, Nets in general haven't been like too jazzed about getting into the draft because years and years and years go by with them barely drafting, right? And so this year doesn't feel different from the historical kind of look at what this team has done. But yeah, but
it feels different, Doug, because not only the draft picks, but they have the superstars on the team. So they're really evolving as an organization, which is nice.
I did make a joke earlier that I said the true Brooklyn grit is the fans that stick with it. I'm with everybody here. Like, good job on everyone rocking through this. This is tough. Like, it's a tough situation. Like, no doubt about it. And I'm not trying to be a downer about it. Really, I'm not. Like, I honestly try to spin this thing every which way as possible. Right? Like, want to see it. We all know why the Nets are in the situation they're in. It's mostly just kind of commenting like the draft is fun and I like having fun with it. It was awesome last year when they had 2 picks because we just went, as hard as we could on all these different guys they could draft. We had all these mocks set up and all these, I was making graphs about like, best chance to draft certain guys. I'm betting the draft. I mean, it's just like a super fun thing. And the juice gets taken out a little bit. This is all to say that I think there's been some opportunities probably that the Nets have had. And we've kind of probably known all along that they might end up in a place where they weren't going to do it because asking prices are sometimes high. There's a world where it just does make sense to not trade DFS right now, right? Like, get him back in the building, have him play well like he did last year, stay healthy, and another team that really sees him as like a sort of a wing stopper kind of guy that can help a playoff team, maybe the price is higher. So I think there's worlds where this just keep Dorian Sharpe, because Nick Claxton doesn't come back and you give more minutes. There's ways that this isn't bad for the Nets. It's just one of these situations where we might just get through the first round and nothing happens.
And who knows, right? Holding on to those players, as you mentioned. Well, you know what you can't give me for one of those players? A 24 draft pick once the draft is over. So now all of a sudden you have conversations about 2025, a deeper draft class, second round picks even then, which you would think would be valuable. Certainly there are silver linings to this. Coming up here in a second, let's just think about, is there anything big potentially? We've already heard some different names get thrown out across the NBA that are creating new levels of traction, whether it's now or going into next off season. We'll button things up and give our final predictions on the draft for the Brooklyn Nets coming up here in just one moment.
Now, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Look, we all love sports. We never wanted to stop. I just told you that I never wanted the stuff to stop with the Nets, but sometimes, that stuff gets out of your hands, but it never stops over on FanDuel. The playoffs have wound down. There's fewer games. You still got the NBA draft over there. You can put in bets over on FanDuel, really with almost anything you want to with the NBA drafts. FanDuel keeps the sports going whenever you want. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Maybe we want to go a little chalk over on FanDuel for the draft. Reed Shepherd minus 210 over on FanDuel with the number 3 pick over there at Houston. Why are we watching that? Because that's the pick the Nets gave over to the Rockets this year. Maybe they land a nice little sharp shooting guard there and Reed Shepherd. Maybe you want to just get out with a little scratch on the back end, take the sting off for them losing it. You can get over on FanDuel and make it happen. Head over to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
All right, so as we tie a bow on the Locked On Nets episode, and obviously our draft preparation coverage, because whatever's going to happen, it's going to play itself out, and then we'll come on the back end of it. And like we always say, we'll take the end of the episode. We're here 5 days a week. Either way, whether or not the Nets end up making a move or drafting somebody, we're still going to break down where this team stands, and we're going to bring the same energy we do every single time. You can see Doug's face right now.
Come on.
Now, the one thing, don't even bother giving your obviously ringing endorsement of that sentiment, Doug. When we talk about this team and maybe the NBA at large a little bit, one of the things that I think is interesting is someone like Fox with the Kings, who all of a sudden is saying, well, I don't know about signing that extension. Let's wait and see. And what I found fascinating, the way it ties into this draft is, Brooklyn was for so long in the fan base. Well, it'll obviously be Donovan Mitchell, and then we'll go from there. And as soon as this Fox narrative has come up, it's, well, then keep your eye on Fox next offseason. He's a great player to pair with Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson. And I think if there are decisions to be made at the highest level around Mikal Bridges, and I know this has been our stance for a long time, you better not get yourself in these rose-colored glasses about these names that get thrown out. Because while, yes, there's always another name, there's also the names that were said that end up not going anywhere. And a lot of times, more often than not, they don't go anywhere. And I wondered, do you feel like it's a little bit humorous to see how quickly it goes, well, now Fox will be the guy that'll come here? I think Nets organizationally and from a fan base perspective just need to stop looking to that next horizon that's going to be filled with sunshine and figure out how you make yourself a better team right.
Oh, buddy, you don't understand how this works, do you? We've been at this game. You're telling us not to get excited about Darren Fox. I mean, is this your first day in the Locked On Nets podcast? Like, what are we doing here? I know you got a different you got a different background, but maybe would we swap you out whole cloth here for just someone else? It's like, hey, everyone, pump your brakes. We don't need to get. What are you, nuts? That's just not how this works. The second the name is floated, we spin over to the trade machine and we figure out how to make it happen. Preferably, they give up nothing and sign him as a free agent. I mean, come on.
Sorry, I went the wrong way. Hold on. I want to apologize to everybody right now. What I meant to say was, shouldn't the Brooklyn Nets be now talking about what do they give up right now on draft night to get Fox in the building, right? Because that's the new core.
Now you get look, I think the Nets are in a situation where I will say that star hunting piece is not unique to the Nets, but it's unique to a small group of teams who are in this arena of like not having the guy, right? Teams that don't have the guy and are going to have money are going to be attached to these guys. It wasn't like Donovan Mitchell was getting traded to everybody out there. It was the Nets, like the Knicks, maybe the Lakers, maybe the Heat.
Sure.
That was it. Like that was kind of the list, right? And so it feels like the Nets world is like that. But remember, when we had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden, we weren't talking about bringing another star. It's just like where the Nets are in the cycle right now begets thinking about these other guys, because hate to break it to you, the Nets don't have the guy. Like when you have the guy, like the guys, you don't need to think about it so much. Now, whether De'Aaron Fox is like a Sean Marks kind of guy, I'm not sure about that, right? Like it doesn't really kind of track along sort of the way he's done other things. That being said, when you don't have the dudes, and at some point you need to have somebody, like you can talk yourself into it. So I get what you're saying, but I think there's just a reason the Nets fans specifically are thinking like this. It's just because it's absence of talent more than anything else.
And at a high level too, I think the reason why they gravitate towards these narratives is not only because you don't have the talent, those high level players, but to me, it also, again, it comes back to because a belief that Mikal, and maybe you believe organizationally this is what they want to do. So it doesn't inform fans approach this, but okay, we want to keep Mikal Bridges. We want to keep Cameron Johnson. We want to keep that core together. That's why you dream about the play that you're bringing in that's going to improve everybody. If you're thinking about it, this is why I find it more fascinating, because the narrative that I and at times you as well, hey, blow it up. Now, whether or not we debate only for Houston picks back of our own control, other opportunities, certainly. But I think the one thing we fall short of, and I wonder about margin moves they'll make on draft night, is, hey, we can make a decision to, quote, blow this thing up and dial ourselves forward to an offseason in 2025. Well, yeah, we're already going to have cap room. Let's go ahead and have another 30 million in cap room because we took expiring contracts back in exit of Mikal Bridges, of a Cam Johnson. It's not a pretty short-term view, but if you believe that this team can attract those players, and if those names are always going to come up, it's all a reason to be open on draft night and to be open to these opportunities, maybe to move these stars, because money talks. Guess what? Culture and building, yes, it all matters. But Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving came here because the check was right. That's why they chose to come here, and the money was available for them. It didn't matter that Kenny Atkins was here as the head coach. Why? Because they asked for him to be fired. It didn't matter that Sean Marks or Joe Tsai was the owners. Why? Because they didn't feel comfortable with them after a certain point. Because why? You weren't winning basketball games. That cycle turns over a lot. And I've just been thinking about that as the draft approaches of, hey, man, there's like 9,000 different ways to do this. And I think sometimes we get narrowly focused, including ourselves, about this is the way that I think it makes the most sense. Sometimes those open opportunities mean flexibility around how many picks you get back for certain players, or what players you think are going to function for you short and long term.
Yeah, and that's just, and it's sometimes you get caught in this cycle. It's man, I don't even know how many times I've said this before, but this is, count this as infinity. The Nets are in a very unenviable position right now. It's not hopeless. It's just unenviable because it's not super clear. Now, unenviable positions can run the gamut. You could be in a position like, this is probably a bad example, but with the Bucks, it's like, hey, we have Giannis, we have Dame, we have no way to get better, right? Yeah. And we've already gone the coach route. We traded all the assets. We have no way to get better. This is tricky. It's not unenviable because you have Giannis, but it's like we're sitting on pins and needles waiting for it. So there's teams all over the place, or there's teams like the Knicks, where maybe you're saying, I mean, it's not unenviable, but like, I don't know, they just had a great season. It's going to be tough to repeat that. And like, it might be, they got OG Anunoby, who's going to hold them over a barrel for a huge contract. Like, that's not what they saw coming. And now, you know what I mean? So it's not exactly the same, but it's not like the Nets are the only team that have like massive question marks here. There's actually a lot of teams that have these question marks. The Nets ones just seem to be bigger with a sort of without clear cut answers. And I think that's the part, kind of rolling back to the beginning. It's like it's like the problem going into this draft. It's like, there's just no clear cut answers. It's hard. Like, we're called this thing, what are they going to do on draft night? It's like, I don't know, maybe nothing. Right. Yeah. So it's kind of sucks, but that comes to be where we are.
I like the idea of lumping us in with like the Milwaukee Bucks and New York Knicks, and not like the Charlotte Hornets or the Detroit Pistons. I like it. I think we should be in those groups. We're all in unenviable positions, and we're closer to like the teams that have superstars and are competing and are fun. But it is a part of it. And
you're not wrong.
You're right. On that spectrum.
You're not wrong. It doesn't feel like they should be in that spot, but maybe an outsider looking in would say, hey, they're closer to the Pistons than they are to the teams I mentioned. It's probably correct, honestly. Like, they just, in terms of now, there's ways for it to improve in ways that those other teams can't, and they have some built-in advantages that these other teams don't have, i.e. geography. But that only goes so far. We watched the Knicks be bad for decades, and they were in the best place. So it doesn't get the geography doesn't get you everything, right? Like, clearly.
The last note for me here, among those pre-draft visits, Dattier out of France, sub-19-year, a lot of development to do, but he's a player that they brought in. He might be that targetable guy if it's the back end of the first round for the Brooklyn Nets. You think about these moves we mentioned, getting rid of a veteran 3-and-D wing, getting rid of maybe Day'Ron Sharpe. How do you replace those guys there? You go look at some of those center prospects. It's not the cleanest group in terms of just bringing body X, Y, or Z. By the way, Holmes, who Doug was very high on, guess what? He's too high. He's now risen up the draft board. Bear, who highlighted, risen up the draft board. So some of the guys we think about might only be achievable if a move like that with Memphis is potentially on the table. At the end of the day, Doug, do you think we'll be talking about any moves at any level for the Brooklyn Nets coming out of draft night? Or, to keep it silver lining, do we think that maybe it's just going to be in the weeks that follow the draft where the Nets can start to get into those discussions with teams?
I'll say they get into the second round, which is on Thursday. I'll say they find a way to get there. We do some Thursday coverage of a second round. I think we're probably a little late in the game here to think about them getting all the way to the first. I don't think there's been enough, like, sort of just hardcore reporting.
Yeah.
No trades have, I mean, as far as I know, no one's made a trade yet, right? Like there hasn't been a single draft pick traded yet. Everyone talked about how all these picks were going to get moved and not, I mean, it's less than 24 hours. Not a single one of these has got moved. The Lakers just said they're hanging on to it. So I don't know. Maybe everyone just sticks, and that doesn't help the Nets either. So I'm going to say no first rounders. They figure out a way to get second round.
The first round, draft Bronny, hold him hostage, and we'll go from there. No, we'll see how it plays itself out. I'm cautiously optimistic the Nets do make a move here. Maybe it is just a second round, but the back end of the first is intriguing to me because I think those prospects, as John Corrales from Locked On Celtics would tell you when I talk to him, he doesn't want to make a pick. Why? It's some stash player that I'll never see on the court based on what this team is in the mode of doing right now, winning more championships. So hopefully some wiggle room there for the Brooklyn Nets, but we'll just have to wait and see. And either way, man, Doug will tell you, we'll be here.
Oh, every single day, weekdays at least. But although if the Nets did something on a weekend, we'd be there too. Look, that's how we roll. It's 5 days a week, no matter what. And if they just happen to do something on a Saturday or Sunday, we'd show up. That's just how we roll, right? This is what we do. And you make sure you roll with us. Subscribe to Locked On Nets over on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
The French air clears up the brain and does good, does a world of good. And that is Vinny Van Gogh.
Oh,
I don't know funny because I got you to laugh, but more that you did like almost a French.
Well, because I knew who you meant, and for some reason the Goff part threw me off. That there might have been actually an artist named Vinny Van Gogh, and then I was like, it's really close to Van Gogh, and that's what got me because it got me thinking for 1 second that there might have been a guy like that. Anyway, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, golf, basketball, yeah.